Hey everyone, welcome to the Unhandled Exception podcast. I'm Dan Clark and this is episode number 87. And today I'm joined by Tabish Bidiwale to chat about the amazing OpenSpec, a framework I use daily. So first of all, a massive thank you for OpenSpec. I love it and it's amazing, so thank you. And secondly, a huge welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here and thank you for using it every day.
Well, I've been encouraging everyone very heavily to use it, so just thank you. So before we start, could you just introduce yourself to listeners and just tell us a bit about what you do?
Yeah, for sure. So, hey everyone, I'm Tabish. I'm the founder of OpenSpec, and simply put, OpenSpec is an open source spec-driven framework. We basically help you create, write, and maintain specifications for your software projects that allow for better outcomes for your coding agent. So it's really all about like alignment and ensuring that, your coding agent does the thing that you want in that limited boundary, because otherwise they can sometimes like invent stuff, make things up, or just get it completely wrong. So it's all about, okay, how do you build the right thing and how do you build the thing right? And that's sort of what OpenSpec helps you achieve.
Nice. Before we start fully digging into OpenSpec, though, I've just got a few small reminders for the listeners. First, this podcast has its own Discord community. If you head over to the website unhandledexceptionpodcast.com, you'll see a big Discord link there. Also, I have a monthly newsletter where I send out hand-picked dev news items from the past month. There's also a dev pick and a dev comic pick, and also updates about the show, about the podcast. It's a great way of keeping up to date with developer news items. If you want to sign up, there's a subscribe link on the podcast website. And lastly, this podcast is brought to you by my own company, Everstack, providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And all of my links and socials and contacts can be found on danclark.com. Cool, that's over with. So now we can dive into OpenSpec, which I've been really looking forward to this conversation stroke geek out. So I guess we kind of you gave a bit of a description before about what it is. I'm aware there's lots of areas I would like to dive into in this episode, but we kind of need to assume that the listeners don't know what it is at all. I've never used or anything.
Yeah.
One of the things I know the subtitle is it's a spec-driven framework.
Yeah.
And I kind of this is one of the things I always find a bit funny, because with me using it, it doesn't feel like that's quite the right term. If someone says spec-driven to me, I think, okay, I've got to write the specs first. I've got to create PIDs or whatever. Almost like with test-driven development, you write your test first. Where with OpenSpec, I find that specs are almost like an artifact rather than the thing that's driving it. Do you find there's a bit of a conflict with the term spec-driven?
Yeah, I think the term spec has become a bit disambiguous, or at least it's become very semantically diffused. So it's it means a lot of things, especially in this sort of new world. I think maybe originally the term was very much focused on, yes, you completely write the spec first, which has its roots in more formal verification or formal process kind of systems. So if you're building in the airline industry or building for spacecrafts, etc., so they have a very formal way of sort of working, where it's you sort of agree on everything up front, you write out the entire spec and you pass that to your engineers there, right, to sort of get it built out. And that obviously works very differently because the domain and the domain there is so strict, right? You can't really be very agile when you're working with code that is going to go on a plane. So that's sort of where the origin of I think spec-driven itself has sort of come out of. But these days it's more about working with your agents. But a lot of us don't actually work in very highly regulated industries where things are that precise. Maybe some of us do, banking, finance, insurance. I think there's definitely still some places there where it is super critical and important. But yeah, it's sort of about how do you get to alignment with your agent, and how do you maintain the right context? How do you get the right input tokens in that is actually going to produce the result that you want? So the thing there is, it's really important to preserve or persist the context, which is sort of what OpenSpec helps you to do, but it might not be the right context or the right thing to begin with. I kind of say that I think you're never really going to write the spec right on the first try. It's really, really hard to sort of do that. And it's a bit of a lost cause trying to get 100% right spec. You might as well just like sort of build it out, sees like what's sort of working and sort of like iterate it from there. But as you're sort of like building it out, right, like you need to maintain some sort of like working history of, okay, kind of telling the agent, okay, this is like sort of what we have tried. Now we're actually going to like update it to be this like sort of new thing. So that's sort of what the goal for OpenSpec is. Like we really want to try and make it more iterative than traditional like sort of spec driven sort of approaches, a lot more like flexible, a lot more customizable and more fluid in general, because it is really, really painful to try and like sit there writing out a spec and trying to get it right, like 100% right on the first time. But the opposite is also not true, where you're never going to, if you don't like sort of maintain some sort of like working alignment as you sort of build it out, it's going to be really hard to actually get to whatever stage you sort of want.
Just to pick up on one thing you said then about it's more about working with the agent. And I think that really rang true with me, because that is for the specs. And we can get more into the OpenSpec terminology in a bit, but with these different artifacts, I never really find that I ever write them or even, to be honest, read them.
Yeah.
I feel they're kind of like almost like a long-term memory for the agent.
Yeah.
But one thing that I find is one of the killer features of OpenSpec, and it's interesting because you've not got this in your getting started default workflow, is explore mode.
Yeah.
That is, explore mode is what I always start with. And it's a game changer for me, because I've found that most of the time after going through explore mode, everything after that just is one shot, it just works straight away. And I find explore mode finds so many different things I hadn't thought about. That discussion is so powerful. So that is like one of the killer features. And it's just a prompt, isn't it? I've looked at the prompt. It's just a prompt.
Yeah.
But it's so powerful.
For sure. It took a lot of iterations to sort of get right. It's very similar to, there's a lot of other people or projects that have come out with like similar sort of things. Like, there's another one called like Grill Me, or like some sort of like interview mode. I personally never liked some of the questions that sometimes agents ask you, especially when like there's lots of them. It's sometimes feels like repetitive, and as like an engineer, it kind of feels like my hand is kind of being held. So what I really wanted to try and do with like explore mode is like kind of wanted an experience where you're able to like explore a problem space. So you're working on some sort of problem, and there might be like different areas of concerns of that actual sort of problems, and it's kind of like expanding that view and kind of like letting you as an engineer like sort of use your intuition and kind of be like, okay, what is like the most like pressing problems, and what are like the considerations we actually need to make here to actually get to like the right sort of solution. So that's like a lot of what went into sort of like the prompt and like kind of the thinking of it is like, okay, we want something that is like going to produce the highest ROI in like the least amount of time as possible. It definitely can be like verbose at times, don't get me wrong, and especially when like the problem space is huge, it can still be like relatively long to get through. There's like certain things I kind of want to do there to make that a lot more effective, more effective for now, where people can kind of like zoom in and zoom out and be able to like jump between things. But yeah, you're completely right. I think it needs to be at the top of the README. I might have a look at it after this.
When I show someone else, that's the first thing I show. So we can maybe get into like the extended and customized workflows later. But I to be honest, I just use the default one. And I always start off with explore and then let it do the proposals and apply and stuff. It's funny when you said about the output of explore mode might be a bit verbose sometimes. I've got a custom skill. I say skill, it's just a prompt, but it's wrapped as a skill, which basically is called one at a time. And it just basically, it's like a paragraph saying, this is a bit too much of a wall of text. Tell me one thing or ask me one thing at a time. Don't show the next thing until I've answered. And that makes a huge difference. So, and not just with OpenSpec, with just AI coding agents in general. So that's just very useful to be able to do slash and then one at a time if I'm finding that the output is a bit too verbose.
Yeah, no, for sure. I also do something similar where I just like, okay, let's just go through it one at a time and give me like a suggested direction for each of the problems, etc. So I kind of can know like what the problem is and like what the possible solution might be. But it's just a quick way for me to like think, okay, the direction makes sense, doesn't make sense, and I can kind of be like yes, no, and then sort of interact with it that way.
Cool. Before we move on from explore mode, I guess from the listeners, because this is an audio only podcast, because I don't want to undersell how good this explore mode is. So as an example, quite often if I've got a GitHub issue or a Jira ticket, and in the new agent window / OpenSpec Explorer, and then I might quite often just say GitHub issue 123. So I'm kind of like, in English, it's explore GitHub issue 123, and then it will use like the GitHub CLI tool and get the information. I might point out to other stuff, maybe paste a few screenshots in. And obviously, it's in the context of my code base anyway, that directory structure. So it can look at the code, it can look at the requirement, it can think and reason. It shows ASCII diagrams showing different options and various things, and really asks you lots of questions. It really tries to, I'll put a link in the show notes actually to your code file that has that skill in. So people can read through and look at what that markdown file looks like, because that is really interesting to read through and see what it's actually doing.
Yeah, I think that's like the trickiest part of skills. Like everyone kind of says like, oh, it's just like so string, or it's like just like a markdown file. But what I found is like it takes like a lot of effort or a lot of like failures to figure out like what actually should be in the skills, and you can only do that if you've kind of like dogfooded it for a while, as well as like you've run into the problem like enough times that you kind of like know what you need from this agent, and then it's sort of like using it enough times to kind of be like, okay, this is what I should have in the skill and this is what I should take out. And the annoying thing is also like sometimes that also just does change between models. Like different models might handle the skill a bit differently, and they can have like some like very, very minor differences overall in the experience of using the skill as well.
That actually leads on to one of the questions I was going to ask a bit later about models, because obviously OpenSpec has, well, I say obviously, maybe the listeners don't know, but the OpenSpec has this workflow where it goes to different stages. So we've spoken about explore mode, but we've kind of got a propose where that can create the different markdown files, which are called artifacts. But in the standard flow, propose actually creates like a proposal, design, tasks, and a few others. Then you've got the apply stage afterwards, which is actually just implement. So it's implementing what's in the task list, one of those artifacts. And then you can archive it, and we can talk about that later. With the models for those different steps, does it make sense to use stronger versus cheaper models at different times within that workflow?
I think previously, maybe like 6 months ago, I would have maybe said maybe not, and just to use like the best model all the time. I kind of found that to be sort of be true to like always just use like Opus 4.5 or ChatGPT 5.1 or 5.2, and just because it just wasn't worth the ROI in terms of like the mental switching costs. It's just like the amount of time you're going to spend like kind of like trying to micro optimize it might not really give you the right sort of return. But I think with like how expensive maybe Fable 5 is, I think maybe there is something to be said where we're starting to get into that territory of like, yes, maybe it does make sense to have like the planning be like sort of higher reasoning models, so like Codex 5.5 or like Fable 5, and then have cheaper sort of models do the implementation. And sometimes it can lead to a better sort of results where cheaper models will just follow the spec to a T, versus like sometimes higher reasoning ones can do like sort of weird things that are like out of bounds, etc. But I don't quite have a benchmark for this yet. This is something I'd be really, really keen to sort of set up in terms of like testing out like different models and seeing like, okay, well, one, how good of a spec can they sort of create? You know, what do they usually sort of miss, etc. And then when they actually implement it, how close to a spec do they actually sort of implement it? And then being able to test it out across like models, tokens consumed, and then like cost per, like doing some sort of like cost comparison between them. It's something I'm definitely keen to do. And I think recently, I think there's like a becoming more of a case for use the more expensive model to do the planning and then use the cheaper models to do the implementation.
I guess it's kind of interesting, really, because so just for the listeners' benefit, one of those markdown files I mentioned before is tasks.md, which is literally a markdown checklist, the checkbox markdown format of everything it needs to do, and it's quite granular. So I guess when it's implementing this, so it's doing the supply mode and it's working through that checklist, as you say, that could be a cheaper model because it's just blindly following that checklist. But then I guess it might hit an issue where there's a compile error or a test doesn't pass, and it's got to reason why it's not always blindly following that checklist. So I guess it's kind of tricky to decide whether it's a cheaper model, because you might need a better, more powerful model to work out why a test has failed.
Yeah, possibly. It's not, I'm not saying like there's like a perfect solution here. And who knows, maybe in the next few months, we'll actually see more of like a auto mode being used where you sort of just let the models sort of
Yeah,
decide like
true.
which models to use, I guess. So maybe the harnesses themselves will like automatically switch between the kind of things. And then that solves like the human problem of like having to do it. So they might even have just like modes where it's like performance versus like cost optimized versus whatever, and that might include like a mix of models and like their behavior, etc. But yeah, it's tricky, right? Like software engineering is in general, it's like you think it's going to be easy, you think it's going to be simple and straightforward, and then you actually do the thing and it doesn't work the way that you sort of expect. So I don't think there's a way to fix that. You can't get rid of unknown unknowns.
It's funny, I don't do this for client work because obviously that's a bit more rigid, but as in, it's better to go through the steps. But for my own stuff, where I've just got my own hobby projects and stuff, and I'm using OpenSpec, I've actually got my own custom prompt, well, a skill wrapped in a skill called OpenSpec hyphen propose hyphen apply hyphen archive hyphen commit hyphen push. And then going back to this explore mode, I find that grills you so much, and really that's such a powerful discovery section that once I'm happy and the agent's happy after explore mode and it says, would you like me to create a proposal? Most of the time then it always works, which is kind of like,
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that use AI and stuff and don't use a framework like OpenSpec. I hear a lot of complaints like, oh, it works at first and then the context rot and blah, blah, blah. And then it makes mistakes and I've got to keep on going back and then the code's wrong and everything. Well, because of this explore mode, I'm finding that before the agent writes any code at all, we've had this deep explore discussion. So once we're both happy, that command I mentioned, that custom command, where it can do all of those steps, and then I go and do something else. And then because it's my own hobby projects, because it also commits and pushes as well, then my CI/CD kicks in and it deploys it. So like I can then get my phone out and use my app, whatever the project is, if it's a mobile app or whatever it is, and I know it's deployed, even though it's just been done in the background. It's amazing.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's definitely a lot of like varying use cases or different types of like people that use OpenSpec, and I'd say like if you're doing it for like hobby projects or I don't know, maybe you're like a startup, that's usually like the pattern I see is that they just spend a lot of time just on the grilling and like getting the mental model right, and then they distill it into like the actual spec, and then they just let the agent run loose on like actually just completing the spec afterwards. You don't have to use a custom skill. For a lot of the coding harnesses these days have like a goal or slash goal or a slash. I was using like agent teams as well in Cloud Code, which also did the similar sort of thing where the nice thing about agent teams was it would actually try and parallelize some of the work. So instead of being like sequential, it would like try and find things it could like work on in multiple sub agents and like do it in parallel. But obviously, it would cost a lot more tokens, but if you wanted to get it done really fast, you could do that. Even before that, there was like Ralph, where people would put in like a Ralph loop, put the completion of the spec or whatever in some sort of like Ralph loop, and just like not worry about context that way. But yeah, I think the problem sometimes becomes is like when it's like a spec like too huge, like how much can you like contain in sort of your head, etc. And then what do you do? Like let's say you like implement something and then like you kind of realize you got it wrong, and like you kind of realize that maybe like some things I didn't actually get right in terms of like the user experience, etc.
I quite often find that if that does happen and stuff, when I'm testing it after it's applied it, at that point, if something's not quite right, by me just telling in English the agent that, okay, that's not quite right, because in its context, it already knows we're using OpenSpec. It will quite often, if there's something that requires an update to the Delta specs of that feature, it'll just update it so it knows to do that. So I just find it kind of where we talk about like these different steps of the flow and it sounds complicated and everything, but because the agent knows how to do it, so even like when after explore mode, it says, okay, I know everything. Do you want me to create a proposal? So I'm just typing yes, even though obviously I know this, because I use it a lot, I know the steps of the flow. A new user would be talked through it by the agent. I just think it's an incredible way of learning as well, all this stuff.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like one of the things that people sometimes miss or don't understand about OpenSpec itself. In like the very, very like initial version of OpenSpec, I actually didn't want to include any of the slash commands because I wanted it to be something like completely like agent driven, where the agent understands OpenSpec. So you just need to like ask for what you want. And my reasoning was that using natural language, you can get a much wider variety of like combinations of things. So you can literally just like ask for things, right? It doesn't have to be like a button you click or a command you run, etc. Because that's like very not deterministic, but it's very like constrained. Like it'll do only that one thing. But you might have cases where you actually want to be able to do multiple things, or like be able to like, do only this particular part of like OpenSpec and then like be able to like update this. So like not all of those actions really need like a command or like some like specific thing to run, because the agent understands what OpenSpec is and how to actually sort of use it. You can always just ask for things. So that's like one of the common things that I kind of see is like people are like, oh, can you like add in this like extra slash command that does this thing? And then it's like, well, you can just ask for it. Like it's going to be like very specific and niche kind of thing. I think they're good as shortcuts, don't get me wrong. So, but we try and like limit the amount of slash commands because it can get like very, very overwhelming. And I think the ideal interface there is that you can just chat to your sort of agent and it'll figure it out. Like you don't have to worry too much about making sure you run the right commands, like the right order to get like the right result.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I'm finding that I'm doing a lot more of now is voice dictation. So I know like with Claude Code, you can hold down space and it goes into that. GitHub Copilot has very recently added voice mode. I also use Whisperflow, which is kind of which I can dictate into any app. But just, again, going back to this explore mode, that's brilliant for just holding down a shortcut and vocally brain dumping a requirement, just speaking it out.
Yeah. The future I'm really excited about is after the voice mode thing is having the agents actually talk back to you and actually making it feel like a collaboration, like between like another engineer, like you're in literally like a room with someone else and you're like whiteboarding out an idea. I think that would be like the most ideal interface, because you're like sort of currently kind of using voice mode and you get back this like wall of text, etc. But it'd be like really cool if like you could just like, be able to like bounce ideas back and forth really quick and like get to like a better alignment there. So I think it'll be possible definitely with some of like the more live models coming up, etc. I think it's like a very underexplored space at the moment.
Yeah, and then you've got like, will AI be able to use your webcam so it can see your facial expressions and hand gestures and things? So I know a lot of like these big companies are like the next form factor from the phone. Things like glasses, AI pendants, and all sorts of things like that, where it's constantly aware of your environment. Whereas some of them are quite scary, because as in, I know that the new AirPods have cameras in them, so it's kind of like, so if everyone's walking around with cameras, what's that? But yeah, it's kind of interesting times ahead, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I have seen people do is that they sometimes get on a call with like another engineer and they talk about some sort of problem, and then they'll instead of like doing explore, maybe they'll just dump that transcript into like sort of OpenSpec and then be like, okay, let's this is like sort of what we created or whatever. Are there any sort of concerns? Otherwise, just turn this into like a spec that we can sort of review and align on.
Yeah, definitely. I think all the different input sources you can give to an agent, whether it's explore mode on or just agents without using OpenSpec, whatever it is. Like we mentioned before, you can point at GitHub or Jira or whatever via CLI or MCP servers. You can, like when I'm investigating and debugging something, I use like the Grafana MCP so it can access logs and traces and all of that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And pasting screenshots in, pointing it at Confluence or Wiki documentation. It's got access to all the code and stuff. So the agent having all of these things and a conversation with you, that's so insanely powerful. It's just, I love this time as a developer. I really do.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's probably like also like the most important step, because one of the things like I've kind of known, but it's like it's starting to become more of a thing, is like I can only work effectively with a coding agent if my mental model on what we're working is like super strong. If I have like a very weak mental model, or like I just don't understand what I'm doing, the results are always just horrible. And if I think about the times when like I've produced like the best code with coding agents, is usually when I pretty much like understand very deeply exactly what we need to do, and it's just a matter of like getting it executed or done by the agent.
Well, that's another use case I actually use the agent for as well. I've got, sorry, I keep saying about the skills I've got, but I've got a skill called Teach Me. And basically, so like where I said like I might point the agent as a Jira ticket or GitHub issue or whatever, and maybe I don't understand that well, and then it's got access to the code and everything, I can trigger that prompt, and it's basically just tells it to, given the context of what we're talking about, teach me one level at a time. So don't show me the next level until I've done the first level. So teach me all the details, ask me questions, make sure I understand it, then we'll move on to the next level. And then because it kind of like, it's gone and explored all the different contexts and the Jira ticket and whatever, it knows it very well. And then it will make sure at the end of that process, I understand it deeply. And then we can carry on.
Yeah.
And that works really well.
Yeah, that's super cool. I might have to look into that. It sounds like a skill from Matt. I forgot his name, but I don't know if that's where
is it Peacock?
Yeah, Matt Pocock or something like that.
Yeah.
Because I think that could be like really useful for like even code review, for example, like just reviewing someone else's code. Like, like that's like the biggest bottleneck right now, right? Like we're all creating these like large PRs. So if you can have like someone just run like a teach me skill on like a PR and just be able to understand that iteratively, I think that would be super cool. I might try it out for some of the contributors PRs because sometimes they're like massive. It's like, okay, what are these guys trying to sort of do here?
I'll send you across the skill so for context, but for the listeners, I'll also put that in the show notes as well. Matt's the one that he created the Grill Me that you mentioned before, didn't he?
Yeah.
The Grill Me skill. Going back to you mentioned about slash commands before, I know that like obviously like, well, I don't think open code does this, but most agents have skills as slash commands. So if you've got a skill, you can trigger it as a slash command. Now, I know that when you do OpenSpec init, so that when you're starting with a new project, whether it's Greenfield or Brownfield, whatever, that then initializes the project with OpenSpec and it creates skills and custom commands or prompts, whatever. Different agents have different terminology for that. But so I use Claude Code, and then one of my clients I use GitHub Copilot CLI. But quite often when I do a slash and say I type /explore, I get both the OPSX:/explore and the skill version, the OpenSpec-explore. Which one should I be using?
I mean, they're both the same. You can actually get rid of one of them if you want. So if you go to do OpenSpec config profile, you can select your delivery method. So you can choose skills only or commands only. This is mainly because I think the ecosystem here is a bit fragmented. So when we initially built OpenSpec, skills weren't a thing. It was just commands or whatever, and that's sort of what it was sort of based on. And then eventually skills sort of became a thing. And then there was like the agent skills standard that Anthropic released, which we also like kind of adopted. And then there was like a lot of debate, like, okay, what's like the actual difference between like a command and a skill? Like previously skills technically weren't user invocable, like as in you couldn't actually invoke them. They were just things that like your agent would like referencing, like, okay, if I need to do this thing, I can go do that. But when they became user invocable, they basically turned into a command, right? And for Anthropic, at least, they treat them exactly the same. Like for Anthropic, like it doesn't matter if you create like a command or a skill, it gets turned into like the same sort of format. I think there's a few additional like sort of settings, but not every single coding agent ended up adopting it. So we kind of added support for both. The other awkward part is, I think, the skill name itself needs to be not super verbose, but it needs to be very descriptive. Because the way that like sort of agents work is like they get passed in all the skills that they have available, including like the skill names and like the description, etc. Versus for commands, usually you want it more like a shortcut, right? So hence why the command names are actually like OPSX, because if you're like typing them a lot, you don't actually want to be typing out OpenSpec every single time. So which is why we kind of like shorten it to just like 4 letters. So that's like what the difference in sort of naming sort of happens. But I'm kind of hoping eventually we just move completely to skills and everyone adopts the kind of standard there. They make skills like user invocable, so I don't have to keep supporting custom commands, and we just get rid of commands completely and it's all skill based. I could go on very long about like the agent skill standard and like I don't know, it's a bit more fragmented than I would like it.
Yeah, with all of these files like skills and commands or whatever, the bit that annoys me, and this is getting better now because we've got the .agent folder, but like we've got .github folder, we've got Claude folder, all of these different ones. It's like, but there's now the .agent, and I think all the tooling's starting to support that. That's a better place, but it's kind of, there's so many times when you've got like the duplication between exactly the same skill file and directory, but in
Yep.
these different, one for GitHub, one for Claude.
Yeah. Yeah. That's like the thing that really annoyed me when Anthropic first released the agent scales thing. If you actually go look at their issues, I commented on it like a very, very long time ago, like right when they released it. It was like you created the specification for agent scales, but the thing that you like really like failed to specify is like where does all of this live? And obviously there's like there's a reason behind it. Like when people see like .claude in like a repository, that's like free marketing for Anthropic, right? Versus if you see like .agents, then it's like not really, it doesn't really do anything. So it makes no sense for them to, so everyone supports .agents except for Anthropic, I think, at this point. And then the other really annoying thing is that Anthropic's gone and created this specification, right? So they've like set the standard. But if you actually go and look at the fields and in the like YAML front matter inside of an Anthropic skill, you'll actually find that there's actually fields in there that are not in the specification, right? And that's like the other like sort of fragmentation that sort of happens when people start putting YAML front matter for things that are just like not in the spec. And it becomes like really it becomes like frustrating because like you're trying to create this like sort of generic functionality that works across coding agents, but there's like obviously going to, even though there is a standard, it's not really like a universal standard, if you know what I mean. And yeah, so there's like a few flags there that I would love to just see work across everyone else, but they currently sort of don't. And it's sometimes a bit of a question mark whether the flags actually do anything at all. And then the other like really like massive fragmentation that actually happens is different coding agents have different types of tools, and the tools are called like very different things. So like for example, like Anthropic has like a ask user question tool. I think they might have changed it recently. So if you want to like ingrain that in the skill, like you want to say, okay, when you're doing this part of the workflow, like ask the user a question, like go use that actual tool. But that tool name might actually look very different for different providers. So you can't just like put in like one tool name there. And it's the same for like sub agents or like different kind of things that might be like unique to a specific coding agent that you can't really like ingrain in a skill. So it's not as universal as I'd love it to be, but you can only do so much.
I've now got an image of skill markdown files with doing like hash if pragmas in there with if Claude code do this, if oh no, let's not go there.
Yeah, I mean that's I think what we'll have to do. We'll have to create like Claude code specific ones. So we'll have like a general one. So currently we have like transformers, so we literally have that like if condition there, like if it's open code or whatever, we like transform certain things in there to be like more open code specific or Claude code specific, etc. But I think we need to like do some internal refactoring to make that a bit better, so there isn't if statements like you said.
Nice. So big open question here then, unrelated to what we've been talking about. I'm finding with teams I work with, because AI is doing like pretty much all the coding now, the way software development teams work is it feels like it really needs to change. Like this whole concept of having a sprint and then developers pick up tickets is already predefined and just are coding away on it. It feels like it doesn't really fit anymore. And it feels like shifting much further left where you've got like the BA people, a QA person, and developer planning the business requirement, or the upfront planning at the very start. Everyone's going to work together earlier on in the process for a user story before it even hits Jira or anything. And I kind of feel that OpenSpec would actually play a big part in this. Going back to this explore mode kind of thing, I'm kind of thinking if you've got like a meeting room, that meeting might be online or whatever it is, but you've got like a BA person, and you've got a developer, you've got a QA person, and you've got your coding agent using explore mode. And that upfront planning is happening at the very start, where it's like a mob session between all of those.
Yep.
And then maybe that session, the output of that can be one of the artifact files, like the proposal, and then that gets stored somewhere, and an agent can pick that up, and we don't need sprints anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that would be the ideal goal. I think it depends on like the type of organization you are. I think what you're describing is like definitely like very like enterprisey, like the BA architects, PMs, and that's sort of what we're building OpenSpec towards. It's like less about like currently like OpenSpec is like very like engineering focused. Like we pretty much only focus on like engineering and like getting like the right sort of things for engineers, right? Like the requirements, the design, the technical tasks, etc. So it is like very, very engineering sort of focus. But I think in the last like 3 months or so, like we have like a ton of adoption inside of like enterprises. So we have like a lot of like enterprises sort of using this, right? And then like the natural thing that like a lot of them sort of ask for is like, okay, how do we like involve our PM into this? How do we involve our designers, our BAs, or like maybe like design folks or like non-technical folk? And in essence, what they're basically asking is like they want like some sort of like centralized context store that like everyone can sort of go in and like put their different information, and like the agent can like reason about like the relationships between like different things. So like when a requirement changes, then like that can like go and update the design, or like the like as in like the UI design, or like the technical design, and then like you can go tell the developer, well, actually the spec now actually needs to change. Are you happy with like this kind of thing? So I see it going, and yeah, you're right that the process itself is a bit undefined at the moment. I personally have like never liked sprints. I just like picking things off the board and just kind of like going down, because like it's just like too much ceremony sometimes with like the actual like agile or whatever. So I'm glad that a lot of it can sort of be automated away, where like the PM or like whoever sort of managing it can just literally ask not maybe ask OpenSpec, like, but even just like the internal agent, just like, okay, go look at like the context store, see what was like added, removed, and like maybe there needs to be like some sort of like approvals or whatever there. So yeah, I think there's definitely like a lot more upfront collaboration. But I think the other nice thing is that if you are sort of using this like universal context thing, the really, really nice thing is that it can be like reactive, and you can be a lot more agile, where you like kind of store whatever your desired state is, and as like things change or whatever, the agent can handle like, okay, updating like what works actually needs to be done across like multiple teams, multiple personas, etc.
I agree with you about the sprints and all the process around it. Like, how many meetings have you been in to just discuss how you do sprints? As in every team I've worked with feels like they've got to, I don't know, almost like a bit of a snowflake, and do like discuss how they do sprints and everything. And it's kind of like, let's just move to Kanban. It's so much easier.
Yeah, for sure.
I mentioned a lot about how for me explore mode is one of the killer features. Another one is, and we've spoken quite a bit about specs, and we've said where I'd argue whether it's, I don't feel that for a particular user story it's spec driven, it's more the specs and artifact. But one thing I find really valuable is those specs that are written to source control for past user stories, for work that's already been done. They are amazing context primers for your current bit of work, which maybe relates to something that's been done in the past.
Yep.
So I know OpenSpec quite often finds those past specs, but I quite often, as part of that initial exploration phase, say, go and look at that particular spec because that relates to what you're about to work on. And that works really well as well. So I think my big killer features with OpenSpec are the explore mode and specs as context primers. I think that just makes a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, for sure. That's like the other thing that I really wanted to build into it, is that I basically wanted to have this experience where, since I was like working so much with agents and I was getting them to do everything, I wanted to be able to get like a diff of the intent and like the things that were changing in the system without like necessarily looking at like the code itself, because like the code diff is obviously going to be like massive, right? So I kind of wanted to be able to specify, okay, well, this is how my system currently works, right? Like these are the actual stories that define like the things, and the implementation in this doesn't matter, right? Like it can be implemented in any language. They should just describe like how the system sort of works at like a high level, like the intent behind the system. And then I want to be able to basically get a diff of the intent. It's like, okay, well, the onboarding workflow previously sort of looked like this. Like the users, when they do this, they see this thing, and like they have to kind of do this or whatever. And then now I want to be able to like update it, so they actually now have to, I don't know, set an organization or something like that. It's like a very simple example, but I want to just be able to like see like the diff of like the intent. I was like, okay, this is how it worked previously, and then now we're changing it to like actually work this way. And that's like sort of like the ideal goal, is that if we are to like work at this higher sort of level of abstraction, right, that's kind of like the things we would want to see. And to do that, you actually need to store exactly how the intent behind the current system. Not exactly like pseudocode, because you can just sort of like take the code and then like try and create the specs from that. But I think if you try and do that, sometimes like some of the intent behind why that code exists is also sort of lost. So it's like not exactly just like, user stories, but it's also kind of describing, okay, well, what actually like sort of went into sort of doing this that maybe isn't like present in the code itself.
Yeah, and also, like, as you say, you've got the intent and the whys, not just the hows, and it can get a lot of the hows from the code. But that's expensive if every time the agent has to look through all the code and infer the hows and everything. Because it might be across a big code base with lots of different services, where actually if these spec files describe it in one place, that's way more token efficient as well.
I think, yes, if you can guarantee that the spec is up to date. If it's not, then like all bets are off, right? So that's like one of the other big problems that we're trying to sort of deal with is like, okay, how do we like detect and like prevent sort of like drift in this kind of thing? Because we don't really expect everyone to make every single edit through OpenSpec, right? And so there's like different scenarios where this could happen. Like maybe you're just like editing something in your coding agent or whatever. Maybe it like misses, it needs to actually update the spec or whatever else. And then drift happens that way. Or in some scenarios, like, you're working in a team, maybe like 2 of you use OpenSpec, 2 of you don't. So like the other 2 are sort of making changes to the code base, but not really like updating the spec or whatever. And that's like the other part where like sort of like drift can happen. So yeah, I think that world is possible. It just takes a lot of like hygiene, and like that's like what we're also trying to figure out. It's like, okay, how do we make it really easy to maintain this hygiene, etc. And I think like the more people use OpenSpec, the more that there's less chance of a drift, and they're like very inclined to use it that way as anyways, because they're doing less direct edits to the code base, at least like not manually changing. Everything is going through like a coding agent.
Quite recently, I was going through OpenSpec and showing it with one of my main clients, with a team of developers, and one of the things that someone said at the end was, as part of this, we can create a custom skill which kind of like looks at what you've just done and updates the previous specs and everything. And I said to him, well, OpenSpec does that out of the box with the Delta specs. So I'd already said it, but then because he must have missed it, but then I re-explained it, and he was like, oh my God, I've got to try this right now. And I could see his eyes opening. I guess for the listeners, just this. Do you want to explain Delta specs, or do you want me to? Which is
I can explain it. So Delta specs are basically just like the delta between what your current spec says and like versus what you want to change. So this is how we get like the diff, right? It's basically saying like, well, this is the existing state of the system, and this is like the proposed state. And you can basically just see the delta between like the existing state and like the state in terms of how are you going to be actually changing sort of the system. So you have like added requirements, modified requirements, and like deleted requirements. And that's basically your delta snapshot of like, okay, this is what's actually changing in that. And then you can kind of review that and apply that delta basically. So you implement it, and then when you archive it, it's when it actually gets applied. It updates the current state of updates the current like source of truth or the current state of the system to be like, okay, you've implemented it. Since it's archived, you're going to assume that it's done, and this is like the new state of the system.
I find it quite interesting where you're referring to the active. I think OpenSpec uses the term change, which is like the folder with all the current artifacts, but you seem to be referring to that as a spec. And I've not really thought about it that way. I see like the spec is when it does the sync at the end and it writes to those source of truth specs. It's kind of interesting that you're referring to the artifacts as specs, which I've kind of not really.
Yeah, like I said, the term kind of means different things. Like if you look at other frameworks, like for example, Kiro calls their plans specs, and then like, I don't know, Factory has like a spec mode, which is like plans as well. And yeah, it's definitely like a tricky term, because specs can mean like a lot of things, not just purely like functional requirements, right? They can be like non-functional stuff, like performance requirements that technically need to maybe hold true, or like there can be like other kinds of sort of details in there. So yeah, I think it's something we'll have to sort of update and like get better terminology for. But like I think the main issue is that there's currently no standard across any of the tools, any of the agents, any of the harnesses in terms of like when people refer to a spec, what do they actually sort of mean there?
Yeah, I quite like OpenSpec's way of doing it, where you've got your current bit of work, which is called a change, and that's a directory with the proposal, the task list, and all of that kind of stuff. So you've got an active change, and then when you archive it, it syncs with the source of all the project specs. So that's where the delta specs get applied to the main specs, and then that change gets archived. And I think that terminology is like a change with artifacts in it, and that you've got an active change, and then that syncs with the specs. I think that works really well.
Yeah, I think I think I did it when I was like initially doing this. I was trying to figure out like, okay, how should this work? I think there was like probably like existing patterns that I kind of wanted to apply, because it's like if you like look at the abstractions, it's like a lot of it's like I think I don't quite remember. You might need to fact check this, but I think it's very much like based on just some sort of like event sourcing pattern of like, okay, this is like how it sort of works, and this is like how like it's sort of gonna look like. And I think like there's a few other things that maybe follow like a similar sort of concepts. Like I'm a big fan of like Terraform as well. So like I try and like see if I usually try and see if like I can make it work like very similar to like those sorts of things.
Yeah, I think it works really well. It's kind of like it keeps everything. It's like in the change, you've got those delta specs, which, as you say, just modifiers. Really, it's like added this spec, removed this spec if that's relevant, or modified the spec. And then when it syncs, it kind of like, it's just, as you say, it kind of like almost like events where it's just applying it on top and making those either additions or modifications or removals and stuff. That works quite well. I'm aware we are quickly running out of time, but one feature which I only found out about this morning, which I think is new, is in beta, workspaces.
Yeah.
My main client, actually, we have 2 mono repos, but we work in both of them. And quite a few OpenSpec stuff that I do spans both. Am I right that this workspace features would help with that?
Yeah, I think the naming is still going to be TBD, and it is like something I'm just like trying out and getting people to try out as well. So yeah, please don't build on top of it. Like it's all going to change. I literally have like a PR up right now that's going to like remove a lot of the stuff there and like simplify it. But there's like different concerns here. One is, okay, how do you work across multiple repos? And 2 is, where do you put stuff that actually like, is maybe for working across multiple repos? So it's maybe like having some sort of store, like possibly like a repository. So the store itself is like just some sort of like Git repository where all of your changes and your work can actually sort of live, and then you can like sort of pull in that sort of context when you're working locally on a repo, or like just making like OpenSpec aware that, okay, this project actually has like multiple OpenSpec routes. There's one like a local one, and there's like this other extra store that you can like sort of pull in information from. So yeah, there's going to be multiple parts to it. So like the main one is like the store, and I think the other part is the local views, basically. So imagine like you have, I guess, a project that technically needs to work across multiple repositories with multiple teams. So you have, I don't know, team A owns repo A and B, team B owns repo C, right? It wouldn't make sense to have like a workspace for all of the repos if like the teams don't really care about like doing that part, but they might only care about doing like their portion of it. So the thing that we're going for is like, okay, the context store is sort of like global or whatever. That's like sort of where you can put your high level requirements and a high level design, etc. And that's where like some of that stuff can possibly live. And then being able to pull in that information. And the way that you sort of do it is like you can set up like a local working view, kind of like I don't know if you've used like VS Code workspaces at all, but it's basically that. So it's like it'll bundle together the context store and like the selected repositories that you choose locally, and it'll like provide this like unified sort of view. And then you're able to like work in the store or inside of the repositories that you've sort of chosen as well. So yeah, it's mainly solving like the multi-repo, multi-team kind of problem there.
Yeah, I'll have to have a play. Don't worry, I know it's very early days, so
yeah,
by having a player can feedback, I guess, and the listeners can too as well. So from a feedback point of view, as listeners are using it, is there a preferred channel that listeners, if they're playing around and they've got feedback, that they can reach out to you? I know you've got a Discord channel.
Yeah, there's a Discord channel. There's also in OpenSpec itself, there's I think like a feedback command, or like you can literally just tell it to give some feedback to myself. So that there's literally like OpenSpec feedback, and it'll create like a GitHub issue.
Is that a skill? On?
I think it's like no, it's like literally like a CLI command, I think. Yeah, and that just creates like a GitHub issue. So GitHub issues is like also like a place as well. But yeah, if you're like curious or interested in workspaces or like getting it working inside of like Teams, etc., feel free to always just try it out and reach out to me for like any sort of questions, etc.
Would that help with what we were talking about before, where getting like the product owners or the BAs involved as well, where they might not actually have the code in the first place, but they can go to one repository, which is just their design file, their specs, artifacts?
Yeah, that's literally like so that's exactly one of the other reasons for creating this sort of global store is like, it's not just for the engineers. It's going to be like, hopefully a global sort of store for both PMs, designers, BAs, architects, or whatever, for them to like put in their sort of work and be able to coordinate the work across. So the agent will be hopefully responsible for the coordination of the work, and then everyone sort of gets a space, and like all of the context is sort of centralized. So yeah, one of the changes we're going to actually do to update that is that we're going to actually make the folders or the files that you can sort of set up a lot more customizable. So currently we have like 2 folders, right? So there's like specs and changes, but the goal there is to be able to specify like different types of artifacts and different types of like artifact collections as well. So for example, you might want to, if you're like working on like a really big project, you might want to create like a initiative collection, right? So it's like a high level initiative. Then in that, you might want to put like, something for a folder for programs. So like for program managers, and like a folder for, I don't know, like the requirements, and like that's where like the product managers can sort of live, and another one for like contracts, for your like API contracts between like different services, etc. So like people can go in and like sort of look at, okay, how are we going to design this like schema, or for, I don't know, some sort of like, this is what the gRPC thing sort of looks like. Yeah, and that's like sort of like the plan is like we make it a lot more flexible, and that's sort of what we are going to try and do, is like try and make it a lot more customizable, hackable, because everyone's sort of like using these sort of things as context anyways. And then like the other nice thing is that it doesn't have to be just .md files. You could maybe have extra things in there, maybe like .html or other sort of kind of things. And the other thing we are really looking to do is like, okay, figuring out, okay, how do we make this more accessible to like non-technical people as well. So like a lot of the business analysts that we talk to, or some of the PMs even, they don't live in Git, they don't live in Markdown. So sometimes it's like, it's very hard to get them to sort of like review things. So that's like one of the other problems we're trying to solve. So in a way, it's kind of like building blocks for being able to set up your own, I don't know, like project context, and having like a repeatable way for like creating these sort of like new projects, and like giving people like ownership over files, and then defining their like own agentic rules in terms of like what is like the life cycle of these things, like, being able to like connect it to other sort of like event sources, and being able to, like update things and then like reach out for approvals, etc. That's like the longer term vision that we're sort of working towards. But we're trying to be like very, very focused at the moment, and like trying to make it work for engineers first to really begin with, and then kind of open it up for more like enterprise use cases.
Nice. When you mentioned about not just Markdown files, but like you mentioned HTML, did you see that there was a video I think it was a video by one of the Anthropic people which went viral about use HTML instead of Markdown? It's like, I don't know how I feel about that. I get the points about, because it's a bit more visual and stuff, but then I do like Markdown.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think there's definitely space for it. I was actually using like HTML for like a while. Like sometimes I turn like the changes into just like a playground, for more of like a playground for the change. So what I want to see is like the before and after of like this is like the command flow or whatever, this is like the user experience before, and then I get to play with the user experience like after. So like being able to do some of those things. I think it's tricky. I think the reason it's tricky is because there's like, I think, different concerns. So you want this like file or this context, right? You have this context, and the context actually has to do multiple things, or this like file has to do multiple things. It needs to be good context for the agents. So it needs to contain the right input tokens that will produce the right output tokens, right? That's like a very simple way of kind of saying it. And like, to be completely honest, some input tokens work better than the other ones, right? But the issue is that those input tokens that work well for an agent might not actually work well for humans reading and ingesting it, right? And it's like this, or it might not just be like context efficient. So imagine like putting HTML as like the input to giving an agent and being like, okay, go implement this or whatever. And it's going to be like a lot more inefficient. It's going to have to read through all of those tags, all of the extra stuff around it, to like figure out, okay, what exactly is like relevant to the task at hand. So currently we've like tried to do the best of both worlds, but I think a lot of people sometimes do like skip reading of the markdown files. So I think there's things we can do there where we kind of move towards like the model view kind of pattern, where it's like, okay, you have your model that describes like your actual data of like the things you want to do, and then you can like build views on top of it. So that might be like a much more like summarized markdown file, or it might be like a HTML kind of thing. So yeah, there's like lots to like kind of think about there, and like hopefully with the direction we're going, it's like there's room for like all of those kind of things where you can have your agent specific markdown, or like things that like will cause the agent to do the right things, and then you'll have like your views which will hopefully let you consume and understand the information like effectively.
Yeah, I think also everyone has different preferences. So some people might be quite happy in the CLI reading Markdown. Some people might want more visual outputs, like reports in HTML. I find all this stuff really, really fascinating. But we are quickly running out of time. But before we've obviously got dev tips. Is there anything that we've not covered that you'd like to cover before we do dev tips?
I think that's mostly it. I think, yeah, if you're using OpenSpec, definitely do sort of reach out, even if it's like bad feedback. All feedback is sort of valuable. If you use it in the past and you're not using it anymore, would definitely love to learn. If you're using some other tool that you think like, OpenSpec should maybe like look towards for like some sort of like inspiration, happy to talk there as well. I do try and talk to as many users as possible, because I think one of the big things we do as developers is like we kind of just build and we never really talk to anyone, and we get some of the concepts wrong. So I do like talking to people. So if you're interested, definitely reach out. Would love to hear your feedback.
Nice. And now the most important question of the entire episode. Where do I get one of those OpenSpec t-shirts or tops that you're wearing?
There's currently only 2 of these in existence, so I'll have to order a few more in. Maybe actually I spent maybe like 30 seconds on the logo as well, so I'll have to get like something a bit more updated. But hopefully I want to try and create something a bit better. It's also, there's a back to it as well.
Oh, nice.
So you can actually see.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would definitely love to get in the hands. Quite a few people have like requested it. Usually when I go on like some on-sites with like some companies, etc., that like are using OpenSpec, they always sort of ask for it, and I've kind of half promised them, but I'll need to set aside some time to actually get it set up.
The OpenSpec merch store. Then.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Okay, shall we do dev tips or picks?
I can do like a dev tip. It's like something that I've been doing like a lot recently, which is instead of like doing like completely like spec first, I think what I do a lot is especially for things that I don't know what I want, I will just wipe code like the fastest, most horrible sort of prototype. So it's almost like prototype first, and then once I get like a feel of it, like I play around with it, I use it, and then I kind of realize, okay, this is kind of what I want, and then I kind of reverse engineer the spec from that sort of like really horrible prototype. So it's like, okay, so the question is always like, how do you build the right thing? And like the way to build the right thing is to just like build it, and then no matter how terrible it is, use it, and then you can build the thing right afterwards. Because I do care about that too. Like I'm not ready to live with what's it called, like complete sort of slop code, if you will. So yeah, so instead of like the workflow being like completely specs, I always like recommend people, just create prototypes, and who knows, maybe like HTML playgrounds can like also like help with some of that, where you can like create like really like interactive sort of experiences, where instead of just like it being like a spec file, it's like more like a visual playground that you can actually click around, and it's kind of like an interactive demo.
I think that's the thing with AI, being able to build stuff so rapidly. It's kind of like, if it does something wrong, goes in the wrong direction,
yeah,
it doesn't matter. You can just learn from that and then throw it away and start again.
Yeah. And is there also like there's a dev tip and like a dev pick?
Is it? Well, as in, so we normally if you've got a dev pick as well, you can do 2. That's fine.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about Kickback AI. I mean, everyone can be getting some return on investment on the tokens. So for like quick context, I guess Kickback AI is like this thing that I saw today on my Twitter feed, which is some guy has basically made an extension that plugs into your Claude code and replaces all of the little thinking bits where it's kind of just like showing like, oh, pondering, or like, they have all of these like quirky things, and instead replaces it with ads from other companies, etc., who have like sort of paid them, and you get like 50% of the revenue from the ads that he sort of gets. So it's like a bidding market where advertisers can go and sort of like bid on slots or whatever, and then you as a user get like 50% of that when you sort of do it. And you also get to see like there's like a live counter on the website that shows you like how much you could potentially sort of earn if you're like a user for like an hour or so.
I'm trying to put the podcast on there as well, because obviously people in Claude Code are going to be interested in development, maybe. So it's
I'm not sure if it'll work if you're in like enterprise. I think they'll definitely have some.
Yeah, true. Nice. So I realized that my dev tip was actually we've spoken about in the podcast anyway, and it was the the one thing at a time skill that I mentioned. I think I mentioned a few skills. So I've got like the one thing at a time where it just asks one question at a time. Do you like if I've got a wall of text or something? That works really well. There was the teach me skill. But I guess one thing I find quite often when I'm using agents, there's certain things that like sentences or paragraphs that I write multiple times. And I suppose just like in code, if you're doing that, create a function, wrap it in a method or something. Where with skills, it's just a markdown file in a folder. I've started like being a bit more proactive by creating like lots of custom skills in my user folder, so it's shared across all my projects. So rather than retyping those same things multiple times, I can just do a / command and very quickly do it, and that's really made a big difference. So I'm just trying to be a bit more proactive myself with doing that. Because it's so easy, it's a markdown file. And if you want to create a more advanced skill, Claude Code's got the skill creator skill, which is very, very good, which again, it's just like, because skills are portable, even for a client where I'm using GitHub Copilot, I've copied that skill across. And it's just really good for creating more complex skills and creating evals and all of that stuff. So I suppose that's 2 dev tips in one, but that's mine.
I can add even one more to that. I think the other thing you can actually do is like have some sort of like, I wouldn't call it like a retro, but you can actually get the agent to look through your traces and kind of figure out, okay, what is like a thing that I commonly do that could be turned into a skill? And so just like let it like set a goal and like let it run for a while and just like let it like comb through all of your agentic things, and like it can be like, oh, maybe like you keep like asking for this like manually. Maybe this can actually just be turned into a skill that can be sort of invoked.
Yeah, I never really looked back through those traces, and that reminded me that I think it was yesterday someone in one of our Slack channels posted a link to an open source project. I'll put it in the show notes, but basically it was like agent views or something where I don't think it's a desktop app. I think it's like a page that just runs as part of the tool, a web page. But it shows like it looks through all your past, whatever coding agent you're using, all your past sessions, shows input and output token usage, shows all various stats about your past chat conversations with the coding agent. So I might have a play around with that. I can't remember the name, but I will shove that in the show notes.
Yeah. I think traces in general, whether they're agent traces or even OpenTelemetry traces, are vastly underutilized. I think they hold like a lot of information. You just need to find out how to like automatically like distill some of that information there.
Yeah, I feel that could be a whole episode in itself.
Yeah.
Cool. So I normally ask at this point, where's the best place for listeners to reach out to you? But we've already like covered that with like Discord and things, and I'll make sure that I include links in the show notes to all the different places as well, so the listeners can reference. So with that, just a massive thank you for spending the time joining me. It's been, as I say, I'm a big fan of OpenSpec, as I'm sure the listeners have gathered in this conversation. So yeah, just thank you so much for creating the tool and for joining us on the show.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. And thank you everyone for listening. A quick reminder that this podcast is sponsored by Everstack, which is my own company providing software development and consultation services. For more information, visit everstack.com. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please do help me spread that word on the socials. I normally use the hashtag unhandledexception, and all of my socials can be found on danclark.com. And as usual, we'll include all the things we've mentioned today in the show notes, which can be found on unhandledexceptionpodcast.com.